we there's a topic that we all discussed, and it was about the Rivian and how that the price is certainly they're walking back on the initial price they gave everyone else, and we know you had talked earlier about that this is kind of reminiscent of the early Tesla days, and maybe even the Cybertruck is even kind of going in that route, but that's still a ways away. So we know you have some expertise on that, and I think a lot of people who are looking at EVs may be interested to know how Tesla handled it back then, and maybe you can compare it to how Rivian is kind of doing it today.
Yeah, well, maybe someone else can give a little more detail about the Rivian. I mean, basically, they said they're raising the prices. Go for it,
They
Luke.
had, I mean, they had optimistic pricing for their pre-orders, right? Um, I guess that's a fairly common thing with new technologies is you
Would you
have a
think?
price point.
Would you think the Cybertruck would be a lot? Do you think the Cybertruck was underpriced? Because
I
seventy
mean,
k for the tri motor was great.
it, I mean, the problem is when you have a new piece of technology that involves new manufacturing, new components, and all that kind of stuff, you can't really know fully what it's going to actually cost you to make. You can kind of ballpark it, and I think there's always the I don't want to say politicizing, but like the marketing spin of like how good can we be? How amazing is this product? Oh, and look how good our price point is kind of like a selling point. So they're definitely optimistic often. A lot of times products will even sell under, right? And then over time as they improve, they'll make up the difference and then, they'll reduce costs and they'll improve on that. So there's always that going on. But I mean, supply chain also is a challenge and the features and all the things coming. I think the difference here is that oftentimes when companies do that, they don't change the price to the pre-orders. They don't change the price and kind of, I would argue, like almost screw over those that are that are early adopters for their company. Whereas Doug can get into the specifics, but Tesla did something similar over 10 years ago. Rivian's doing it now. So my understanding is they've raised the price quite substantially, tens of thousands of dollars, and they're not locking it. Like they're saying, sorry, that you pre-ordered it and you thought this was the price. We're not selling it to you for that. So you can either give up your pre-order or you paying us more money. Which
Yeah, I think what they've done at this point though is that they have backtracked. So if you had the pre-order before they made this announcement, they're going to honor it, and they also are going to, if you canceled, as you already had a pre-order and you canceled in disgust, they're going to let you get back in at your pre-order price. But anybody
and
new
and
trying to order now
supposedly
has to pay the new
in your
price.
same spot in the queue. You don't have to go
Yeah,
back to the end of the line.
because
sure,
it was totally their bad as they put it, right? So.
right?
Uh, so they're going back on it. They're going to fix it for you, which wasn't what Tesla did, back in 2009.
Yeah, can you
Sure.
give us some more information about how that was back then?
Yeah, so it was, sort of a complicated time. Tesla. I mean, if you can just sort of think about how different it was. I mean, Rivian is coming into an environment where there are established EV companies, right? I mean, or Tesla exists, uh, GM and other manufacturers actually make production EVs, right? But there was no production EV back when the Roadster is coming out. There used to be back in the late 90s, the EV1, and Toyota even had a RAV4 and such. Ford had a truck also back then, but some years had passed. The California EV mandate had been done away with, and so Tesla was just starting back to okay, can we have EVs, and doing it in a way that okay, let's do a sports car, let's do things that people can be excited about, and change the script on EVs. But the truth is that they were selling it for more than it cost them to produce, and and it was around the time of the Detroit Auto Show that Tesla introduced this Roadster 2.0, and they also introduced the Roadster Sport. So they're like, okay, look, here's a new Tesla that has all these new options, that can do cool stuff. And the real impetus behind the Roadster 2.0 is that they didn't really say at the time was actually lowering the production costs. I mean, if you compare the two vehicles, like, you know, there are things that, like, they had these really expensive connectors, for example, that were just unneeded, and they just got rid of them, you know. And just a bunch of things that the PEM, the power electronics module, is much simpler in the 2.0 Roadster. So they basically learned some things, but they still had, you know, people that had paid for the version 1, you know, full price 2 years prior. And the funny thing also is that, you know, these cars, the majority of them weren't even made until 2009, but they wanted to lock in, okay, this is the first model year. So here are these cars being delivered and made in 2009 that were actually, you know, that were being called 2008 vehicles because, you know, people paid for the first production year, and they made a big deal about that, and they did a lot of engineering with the VIN numbers. You know, people wanted a nice low VIN number, and they you know, because they were paying for it. But so what they did was they made a change to, in a weird way, they released information about all these options you can get. Like, oh, here's, you know, some special wheels you can get, and, you know, premium sound system. But these are all things that people had already locked in as part of their car. So people were confused. They're like, okay, here are these new options, and they cost more money. But I've already paid for that, right? You know,
exactly.
But what they did was, so it was a little bit tricky. And what they did was that, oh, we're not changing the base price of the car. What they said is, oh, we're just changing the price of the options. But these are options that people thought they had already paid for. So when you make a you know, item that was standard, you make that extra cost item, you've effectively changed the price of the car.
Right, yeah.
And it was, you know, for some people it was as much as, you know, $17K more expensive for their car. I think for most people it was like around, you know, $4,000 extra or so. I mean, the main difference was the wheels. There were these neat kind of slanted spoke wheels that were like, you know, designed for the Tesla or something, and that they're really, you know, kind of
aerodynamic
like
and
them.
fancy.
Yeah, so this was the Tesla, you know, wheel. The Tesla Roadster wheel is iconic.
Yeah.
And that all of a sudden became like around a $3,000 or $4,000 option. People are like, what? And they had these standard wheels that were nowhere near as cool. I mean, they're probably selected to not be as cool, so people would want the better wheels, right?
I agree.
So anyway, so a lot of people were unhappy about all that, and people were really confused. You know, we had threads on the forum, people upset about it, and you know, after the fact, you know, Elon eventually wrote a letter, and the truth is they really had to increase the price because they needed it to get additional funding, because they were essentially selling the car at a loss, and they were not allowed to do that by the people that were funding them. So that was the main difference. But yeah, about 400 people, like the first 100 or so, you know, actually got what they paid for originally, and then the next 400, you know, basically had to pay more. They did other things too to try to convince them to get the later vehicle, you know, to get the Roadster Sport. You know, it's got more performance. And then they were selling the original, you know, the first model year at a $30K premium, you know, because if you really wanted that first year car. But the truth is that first year car cost them more to produce.
So in the case of Rivian, I'm not sure if you read the press release that he put out, or the note that he put out, but it's kind of reminiscent of what Elon did, you know. But you know, my question is from someone that's on the outside looking in, like, did they anticipate? Do you think someone? This is speculation. Do you think someone said, "Hey, you know what? We can't afford to make this vehicle at this price. So should we start it at this number, and then, you know, down the road once we get some traction, say, hey, look, you know, we goofed. We made a mistake." Or do you think they thought, this is speculation, just what you think, or do you think they thought, okay, we can make this truck for this, and then Corona happened, you know, and that kind of made things change their mindset? Do you think the supply chain affected what Rivian is doing now?
I have no reason to doubt their honesty on that. I mean, the truth is these things did happen. Corona happened. Right. There's the supply chain issues. all that stuff, inflation, sure, you know, but you just don't say, okay, now everybody, you know, people that have paid, you gotta, you know, we're going to change it on you. You gotta find some kind of balance, and they, you know, they're right to backtrack. That's a lot to eat, you
For
know,
sure.
I think
but
they
they
had
are,
to though, just to the
yeah,
outcry, right? It's not like they wanted to backtrack. They
yeah,
wanted what they initially said.
they had
Well,
to do it for the goodwill, right?
so Rivian, I mean, they started working on this truck in 2016, 2017. That's when they first started to pull together their parts list, you know, their bill of materials, kind of take a wild guess what this is all going to cost us. Lots changed since then.
Yeah, and so it's similar with the Roadster in that, you know, people are placing their orders back in 2006 or so. And, you know, these are people that had, you know, given faith and money to Tesla. And, you know, I think the real difference is, and, you know, somewhat of a calculation for Tesla is like, you know, does it make sense to burn these early, you know, adopters, these first customers? Because the truth is, there aren't that many of them, right? 400 people had to kind of eat it, right? Compared to hundreds of thousands of, you know, Model S owners and Model 3 owners, you know, just sort of moving forward. And it was the survival of the company that was at stake, really, right? So they made a calculus, and they, you know, right or wrong. I mean, actually, you just have to say right because the company survived. But you know, there are certainly people that at that time that felt really burned by it, and you know, people that got their cars and they love their cars, and they're, you know, but they're like, I'm never buying anything else from this company.
Do you think that's an inherent risk for any early adopter?
Oh yeah, yeah, sure, sure. But you expect to be treated with respect, right?
Agreed.
And a lot of people felt seriously disrespected by it, and you know, Elon sent out a letter that, you know, was pretty good, but you know, at the time it was not great. Did not go over well. There were a couple town halls that we did back in. If you watch Revenge of the Electric Car, you can see a clip of the one that happened in L.A. There's another one that happened in Northern California and at the Menlo Park store, which I wasn't there, but I listened to it live because they put out you could call in and listen to it. And so I listened to that, and that meeting did not go well. Elon said, "Well, but you're getting the tax rebate, you know," and people were like, "But that's our rebate." They're not happy.
Right.
So that did not go well, and the tone of that meeting was not good. In fact, Tesla promised to release the audio of the meeting after the fact. They never released the audio of that meeting. It's like it was too it was just too damaging. I mean, the whole thing was just a really bad thing. They did a few of those back then, these sort of town halls, and there were some recordings that were released. Man, I wish I could find them because they're kind of neat from a historical standpoint. Of course, now, you know, everything's live streamed and on YouTube, but you know,
Different
back
times.
then, back then it was people calling in maybe, and it was kind of an earlier time.
How did that whole process? Did you know? Tell us a little bit about how you followed. Did you follow Tesla from when they first mentioned that they were making cars? Where did you come into the Tesla world? And when all this happened, did it like make you feel like I'm not buying a Tesla, or did you stay the course and say, you know what, regardless, I'm still going to get this car, or I'm still going to be investing in this company?
Well, I mean, that's an interesting story. I mean, you know, TMC has been around since 2006, back when anybody heard of Tesla, really. My first exposure was an article I read in the New York Times that had a little snippet about how when they gave somebody a ride in the car, they'd tell them to adjust the radio. So they'd lean forward to adjust the radio, and then they'd slam on the accelerator so they'd get jerked back. And I was like, wow, that sounds great. And you know, I was in grad school at the time in applied physics, and to me, the Tesla Roadster was just amazing. I mean, you had a car in its simplest form, and that's something you look for as an engineer. You want simplicity, right? And so you had, an energy source, which was the battery, and you had a motor, which, has, approximately one moving part, and connects to the wheels, and you go. And like, okay, that's it. Not all
No
the
mess, no fuss.
complications of internal combustion engine with the pistons and at that time, I was driving a little Miata, which was a great car to sort of learn on.
Great car.
To learn how to do stuff. A lot of space in engine bay, and I had a lot of fun with that car. And I'd park near the lab and get the tools and, from the lab and work on it. And the Roadster just seemed so appealing then. But, there was no way I was buying that car then. I was in grad school and
Right.
poor. I'm like, okay, I'm not buying this thing, but I was interested. And what was neat was that Menlo Park store was pretty much right across the street from the campus. And I was able to stop by, and I stopped by like every week or so to see what was going on. You could see like the sea of cars that were waiting to be delivered, and they weren't because there's some little issue that they had to deal with on them. And I take photos and post it on TMC, and
Now they just deliver them.
yeah. But it was funny because all the real assembly was done there. I mean, they had these gliders that were flown over for the most part from Hethel in England, so from the Lotus plant. So they're just like basically these rolling bodies, and in Menlo Park they would install the majority value of the vehicle, which was the motor and the battery. The battery pack, and they did it basically in what used to be this the Chevy service center. It was a Chevy dealership, some years prior that actually Stanford owned, and then Tesla got a lease on that land. So
Actually wondering about how this is going to impact resales, because right now, I think Mark, you mentioned this in the last podcast, how there's this whole concept of selling your Tesla because you can get more for it than you paid, and then buying another one. And so you've got all these early adopters that have bought Rivians. They have the lower price point. The price is higher now, so the value has gone up. Are we going to see a lot of like people, early adopters, you know what, I'll sell this one and then I'll buy another one or something else in the future?
The one thing I've seen a lot with EV owners, at least in our neighborhood around here, is people tend to cycle through EVs. They want the newest toy, whatever the newest toy is. So
we like to throw out our iPhones.
Well, in a way, it's almost like that. Because you've got a car that's 1 year old, and the next gen has got all the new computers and all the new features, and it's got the software that won't run on the old car. Or a different manufacturer has got a different set of toys. And I've watched these guys cycle through 3, 4, 5, 6 cars in just a few years. And it's almost like a habit.
It's true that more and more, especially EVs are basically tech items, right? And so there is technology gets better, range gets better. But regarding Rivian, I mean, you think that, people could, if they don't want it, they could sell and split the difference on the current, price or something. Or, we see that already with Tesla. So many people on TMC, trying to sell their reservation spots, and
Exactly.
Tesla tries to crack down on that somehow, but if there's a wait for a car and there's somebody that's willing to pay a price to get it sooner or now, they'll do it.